This video is not for whales and dolphins, it's for you because you are just like me. Average Life Gamer here, and today I want to talk about Hugo, because if you didn't know, Hugo is coming in the second half of 1.7 and his kit is already in game for us to check out. I'm not going to say anything more than that, no story spoilers here, but you can play him right now, so I will be showing some footage from that. So let's break it down, let's talk about how he works and how you're going to be able to get the most out of him as soon as he comes out. So what we're going to do is we're just going to walk through his skills, and then I'm going to show some demo stuff of those skills in action as we're talking about them. The first thing that we're going to start with, though, is we are going to start with his core skill, because it seems like the most important part of his kit. It's also an absolute yap fest. So we'll break it down. We'll make it easy to understand. Don't worry about that. You will note that this is the in-game version of Hugo, and he's limited, so you can't upgrade him, but you can see how he's going to look at core F, i.e. once he's fully upgraded, and that's what we're going to go through now. So first things first is his core skill is incredibly important. Yeah, it's a yap fest, but it's going to be the most important thing that you're going to want to level up when you actually do get your hands on Hugo. There are some key things here that are going to be different depending on the level of that core skill enhancement, but one thing that specifically isn't, because it's not in green, you can see it's not in green, is this buff that he grants himself following a chain attack. So it says here, after a chain attack, he enters this state for 6 seconds, and it increases his crit rate by 12% and his crit damage by 25% for those 6 seconds. And that'll be really important in just a moment. You'll want to get his chain attack off, and then you will want to totalize the enemy, which will come on to how that works in just a moment. But before then, let's go through the rest of this. So second things second then, which is the stun character buff. So when there are stun characters in his squad, he receives an attack increase of either 300 or 900, depending on whether or not there is 1 or 2 stun characters in the squad. Now, I think Hugo is probably the first character where double stun becomes the way to run him. Because if you think about this increase between these two is actually really good. So running 1 stun character for the 300 extra attack that kind of makes sense, but running 2 for the extra 900 attack is actually a huge buff. That's like a Lucy buff without having to run Lucy. So that means you can run those 2 stun characters, particularly if those stun characters are going to help to buff Hugo's damage. This could be absolutely huge. And again, I think the game is kind of pushing us the direction of running him this way. Now, does that 600 attack buff get anywhere close to something like Astra can provide? No, Astra can provide like 1200 attack buff. So yeah, it's nowhere near that amount, but Astra's spots are limited and she's not going to be able to be run on every team. But I also think that 600 additional attack doesn't limit you out of running other additional supports, especially if those supports are also going to contribute positively to daze, because as we'll get onto in a moment, Hugo really wants the enemy to be dazed. So for example, Caesar provides a really big attack buff as well, and also a damage bonus. So does that offset running 2 stun characters? Yeah, it kind of does. So again, you can consider putting in another supportive character, but I actually think it makes the most sense to run him with 2 stun characters, and we'll talk about why a little bit later on as well. So this is a whole big yap about how Totalize works, and I'm going to break it down for you. Totalize basically does a huge additional damage hit, 1,000 here, and then it's also buffed by other things up to a maximum of basically 3,400%. Now, this Totalize effect is an effect that Hugo will be able to trigger by using either his EX special or his ultimate. And when he uses either one of those abilities on a stunned enemy, that is going to result in all of this additional damage at the cost of ending the stun early. Now, if you were to end the stun early, then you would ideally want to get back into a stun state as quick as possible. And that's where the idea of having 2 stun characters come in. Again, I think having 2 stun characters, or 2 characters who at least can contribute to the daze meter, so Caesar is a valid option here, is going to be really, really beneficial. Okay, so after he's triggered that Totalize effect, he will also give additional daze back to the enemy, which means you won't be working from 0 after you've stunned the enemy, which is kind of good. Now, much like with the damage, this depends on how much time is remaining on the stun meter. Now, essentially, all of this yap basically means, and all of this yap basically means that the earlier in the stun window that you are able to trigger the Totalize effect to get the huge damage bonus, is more damage and more days. So essentially what you'll want to do is you'll want to chain attack with Hugo to get the additional benefit of the 12% crit rate and the 25% crit damage, and then also the attack buff as well. And then what you will then want to do is you'll then want to unleash the Totalize, either through the EX special or the ultimate. Now, if you did use the EX special outside of the enemy being stunned, then the days accumulated by that skill would increase by 20%. So basically, he's going to add additional days if the enemy isn't already dazed. So he can also function like as his own stun unit if you are like running him solo. So, but I don't think that many people are really going to be doing that kind of stuff. Okay, and then there is something else to discuss here, which is his additional ability, the Prelude to Finality, when another character in the squad is a stun character or shares the same attribute. So basically, definitely pushing you to run those stun characters. Then his chain attack damage increases by 15%, further increase of 35% against normal enemies, so against non-boss enemies. And then when Totalize is triggered, an additional damage buff of 40%. EX special attack also generates additional energy when triggering Totalize, and that can only trigger once every 30 seconds. So basically, this is a really good additional ability. This is not one of those additional abilities where you can kind of just shrug it off. It's not a huge deal. This is an additional ability where you want to make sure it's active. And I think, to be honest, considering how much Hugo benefits from stun, it would be kind of crazy to run him without another stun agent. So absolutely, yes, Hugo is Mr. Stun. We should be running Hugo with stuns. But just before we move on to the rest of Hugo's kit, this is your reminder that you probably aren't subscribed. Liking and subscribing is a great way to support creators like me on YouTube. It also lets me know that you enjoy these kind of character deep dives. And you can also drop me a follow over on Twitch, which is where I work out all of this stuff kind of live. And you can also join the Discord if you want to send me pictures of Lycan and Hugo kissing. So let's talk about the basic attack. So the basic attack is pretty straightforward, but I will say that towards the end of the attack chain, there are 2 shots that you can fire and you can actually hold to deal more damage. Here's the scaling for that at level 10. So you can see the shot multipliers are higher when they are charged versus not charged, and there are 2 at the end of the basic attack chain. The basic attack chain itself as well also does have some grouping, so I will show some footage of me kind of messing with that a little bit now, but yeah, there is some grouping involved in the basic attack combo. It's not as good as Evelyn's grouping, but I think if there's a clump of enemies, you know, in that first wave of shield defense or something, it will actually be really useful to kind of bring them all together. So definitely something that you can make use of. I will say the dodge doesn't seem too crazy, nothing really crazy here. And then the quick assist, you can trigger the shot following the quick assist. You just need to hold the basic as you come back in. EX special, obviously this is what triggers that Totalize effect, and then the chain again also triggers that Totalize effect. And also with the EX special and the chain attack, you can go straight into the 4th hit of your basic attack. Something else I would say about the special attack is that the special attack does enable Hugo to kind of get behind an enemy, because he kind of zooms through them before he triggers the special, either the normal special or the EX special. So both of those doing that actually means that he might be a pretty good user of Nekomata's engine. I know it sounds crazy. 25% damage bonus from behind, though, is not really anything to sniff at. And the fact that he goes through the enemy before he triggers the Totalize effect, unless the enemy is like absolutely huge, you know, big bosses and Deadly Assault, I think that's actually a huge win. That could be really useful. Okay, let's also then talk about different teams. So considering this additional extra that he gets with the stun characters, I think we're going to be wanting to run him with other stun characters. And I think that there are some sacrifices that you can make with the stun characters that you run with him. Because, for example, if you have Lyta and Lycan, I think that will actually end up being his best team. I think that the buffs that both of them provide are going to heavily help his ice side, plus the fact that they're both really good stun agents in terms of building up that daze meter, so it's going to enable him to do a whole bunch of stuff. Obviously, you could also, though, switch in other characters here and then kind of give up the fact that you may not be able to benefit from everything that they offer. So, for example, you could put in someone like Khalida, and even though she'd miss out on her additional ability, if you put her with Lycan, for example, she's going to build up that stun meter really, really fast. And I think that's something that Hugo could massively benefit with. Similar deal with Chingy as well. She will help to build up that stun meter really, really quickly. And essentially any other stun agent that you might have. I think Caesar is also going to be a decent shout to run with Hugo. The buff that she will provide will offset the difference that she's not going to get from the stun here, but she's not actually supporting in any additional way like someone like Lighter would. Obviously, he's running alongside Lighter, so that gives you a little bit of food for thought. And on top of all of that, yeah, I mean, obviously he's going to work well with Astra. He's obviously going to work well with other additional supports as well. So if you don't have 2 stun agents to run with him, Nicole would be okay, Astra would be great. But, you know, those slots are pretty contested at the moment. In terms of Hugo's equipment, in terms of engines, there's quite a few options. We've already mentioned Nekomata's engine could actually be a really good fit for him. Obviously, his own engine as well, when that actually comes along, will, I'm sure, be very beneficial. Consider the Battle Pass one, the cannon rotor that they've got on here in the demo. And you can also consider the normal suspects. The Starlight engine, the Street Superstar would actually be pretty decent as well. Marcato Desire would also be really useful as well if you did get that from the recent event, or maybe Gilded Blossom from an event that was a little while ago. So the event engines, he'll have a few decent A rank options, I think. And I also think that, yeah, like considering the way his special attack works, there's a real chance that Nekomata's engine could be really useful on him. And now in terms of the drive disc, the 2-piece is kind of up to you, and it depends on what 4-piece you run. So let's talk about the 4-piece first. So the 4-piece that I would think that you would want to run on Hugo would actually be Hormone Punk. So Hormone Punk is going to give you a big buff for 10 seconds and then have 10 seconds of downtime. So the way that that's going to work is it means that when you switch on to Hugo, you've probably been sat on your 2 stun agents, or at least 1 stun agent and a support for a little bit. You keep Hugo off field so that when you bring him back on and he does his chain attack, then he benefits from the big buff from Hormone Punk. Now, this could be a little bit of an issue if you are wanting to bring him on more regularly, you want to give him more on-field time, or maybe the effect of your engine involves you, doing additional things like it does for Starlight Engine, then you might need to bring him on before the stun window to get that buff effect up, and running Hormone Punk in those situations would be a little bit more counterintuitive. So that's where I think, Woodpecker would come in. I do think Hormone Punk would probably be best for him because he's definitely one of those agents that literally just wants to come on and do big damage during the stun window. It's not to say that he can't also contribute to damage outside of that, but that is really where he's going to shine. I think the fact that the game is trying to push us to run him with 2 stun agents means that you're not going to spend that much time on field with Hugo because you're going to be spending time on them, and then Hugo's then going to come on and benefit from that big Hormone Punk buff. But it is much easier to manage if you ran 4-piece Woodpecker. Branching Blades is a good 2-piece. Crit damage will always be good, but then if you decided to run Hormone, then it might be a little bit easier to get your crit rate up if you wanted to run 2-piece Woodpecker, stuff like that, which is why I said 4-piece first and then 2-piece second. Attack is always a good shout, so you could also run 2-piece Hormone or any of the other sets that give attack like Astral Voice. And anyway, that's about enough out of me. I feel like I've yapped for long enough about Hugo. Hugo's looking really cool, guys. I actually am surprised as to how much I've really enjoyed Hugo's gameplay, and it's given me some food for thought as to whether or not I might actually want to pull him. Let me know what you guys thought about Hugo down below, anything you think I've missed, and as always, remember to like and subscribe for better average luck on all your pulls. Responsibly, stay weird. Bye.